They call each other brothers. They sign a treaty. They quite at each other's movies. They meet every word. And then they shout at each other with tanks or frozen river. Both sides, real bullies, real dead. This was 1969, just 9 years later. And today, the same country's president has millions of Chinese fans, fan memes, fan fictions, fan edits, people who unironically call him 普京大帝, Putin the Emperor. Brothers, enemies, meme gods. What do you even call that? Привет, товарищ, and Babus here. As a Chinese, I will tell you what Chinese people call it. They don't have a word for it either, but they've been living it for 600 years. Before we get to treaties, wars, or memes, we need to go back to a time when Russia barely existed as a concept in Chinese minds. We are in the Ming Dynasty, 16th century. China is a middle kingdom, 中国, the center of civilization, surrounded by people who are not quite civilized yet. Junior to the west, you might know it. Monkey King, Pixie, the Monk, the Journey. One of the most read books in Chinese history, written in Ming Dynasty. Actually, is a fictionalized version of a journey narrative. The Great Town Records on the Western regions, written by Xuanzang, the Buddhist monk who traveled Middle Asia for 19 years in the 7th century, who was like Mikey Oki then. He heard the story of Rakshasi, the female Rakshasa, and put it down in his famous work. This is the first time it was systematically introduced to China. Rakshasi is an island located in nowadays Sri Lanka, and also a name of diamonds with beautiful appearance. They will seduce external merchants with singing and dancing. But once the man had let down the guards, the Rakshasis would confine them in iron cages and devour them one by one, storing the bones within the fortress. And somewhere in that book, even further than the documentary version, there is a Locha lady named Iron Fan Princess. And yeah, Locha is a word transliterated from Rakshasi. She is a ruler of flaming mountains with her plantain flame. One could empower the flame, while the other could stop, with which she controls fire that could burn the sky. And she is not evil. Exactly, she is just operating by different rules than everyone else. This figure is one that helps the idea of Rakshasa or Rakshasi really become popular. And by coincidence, at that period, Russia or Russia was also transliterated as Locha for the first time for the shared similar sound. When the expression spread, two different concepts start to melt into one. After all, either diamonds or Russians does look the same in Chinese view, furry in different colors. I'm not saying 16th century Chinese people thought Russians were diamonds. I'm saying that when you've never met someone, your imagination fills in a lot. Here's the thing about first impressions. Russia was not a political concept for 16th century China. It was a mythological one, a place of cold, power, and mystery, positioned as age of the non-world. Every relationship has a creation myth. China and Russia's first one involved diamonds. This should have been a warning. It was not a warning. Here is a fact that almost never makes it into Western coverage of the Sino-Soviet alliance. The country that became China's big brother in 1950 has spent the previous century stealing Chinese land. Tsarist Russia signed what China calls unequal treaties. They took over 1.5 million square kilometers of territory, roughly the size of Mongolia. They built the Chinese Eastern Railway through Manchuria. They railroad on Chinese soil. And Russia is called one of the countries that invaded China and seized most territory in modern history, using the most brutal means. And then, the Russian Revolution happens. The Tsar falls. The Soviet Union is born. And suddenly, a completely different narrative. It's like you met someone on Tinder who was toxic and hurt you so bad. But at the moment you want to unmatching, you just found out that all the profiles have been changed to another guy, and he started another move, which is exactly what you need. 1950, Mao Zedong and Stalin signed the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship. China just came out of 20 years of civil war and Japanese occupation. The country needs to be rebuilt from almost nothing. Over 20,000 Soviet experts come to China. Factories, universities, hospital, nuclear program, military. Chinese students go to Moscow on scholarships, and students must take a Russian name. You may be wondering why all Chinese who study abroad like to name themselves as foreigners. This is possibly the origin. A general secretary in CCP even gave himself a Russian name, Bogdanov, and took it as his nickname, Bogu. And also, Soviet films play in Chinese cinemas, and the slogan is everywhere. 苏联的今天就是中国的明天。The Soviet Union's today is China's tomorrow. People genuinely believe it. But here is what the propaganda did not show. Soviet experts live in their own compounds, nicer than Chinese quarters. The end salary is much higher than Chinese. For example, average salary of a Soviet expert was from 1.5 thousand to 3,000 yuan, while the salary of Mao was just 400 yuan. They got different food, a different standard of living. In the workers' paradise, Chinese engineers who worked alongside them used the phrase, quietly, never officially, 洋大人, foreign laws. The same phrase Chinese people had used for Western colonized officials in the 19th century. Different flag, same posture. Chinese students in Moscow sent back leaders that were enthusiastic on the surface, which was true at first. But memoirs from that era tell a different story. Stories of being underestimated, suspected, and even monitored. But it is important to understand, China could not afford to be ungrateful. The Korean War just ended. The US had imposed a trade embargo. West Europe was not offering anything. Japan was an enemy. The Soviet Union was literally the only option. So the gratitude was real, and so was the resentment. Both were true at the same time. That is not a contradiction. That is just what it feels like to be in a relationship you did not choose with someone you cannot afford to leave. The most cursed couples are the ones where both sides know the score and stay anyway.
Because I think the Soviet Union is no longer a socialist country. It has degenerated into the social imperialist country.
1960, Nikita Khrushchev gives order without any signs, literally. Every Soviet expert in China is to leave, all of them, within 1 month. And the attitude is, in Chinese, 不留一张纸, not leave even a piece of paper to China. They take the blueprints, they take the technical manuals. In some cases, they even take the machinery itself. Hundreds of joint projects abandoned. A nuclear reactor project halted. That's an exact lesson about how to ghost the other completely. The official reason, the Chinese side pursued an unfriendly line towards the Soviet experts, such as brutally rejecting their advice and attempting to brainwash them with views deviated from Communist Party of the Soviet Union. But underneath the excuse, it was a power struggle. Who leads the communist world? And neither man was willing to follow the other. After the experts left, Mao did something very Chinese and very human. He turns grief into anger, and then he turns the anger into propaganda. The word was social. Soviet revisionism, or another term you should be more familiar with in English, social imperialism. Khrushchev and Brezhnev were not just one, they were class traitors. Soviet workers were still brothers. Soviet leaders were enemies of the people. Socialist in words, imperialist in deeds. This distinction mattered because China could not admit it hated a whole country. It's about to hate the leadership, the theory, the deviation from the true path. And they even wrote a commenting essay on the Soviet attitude and played it all day long across the country by the National Wild broadcast speaker system. It still exists in China's countryside nowadays. As for the shared history of the 1950s, not erased, but reframed as a period when China suffered under revisionist influence. But what did ordinary Chinese people actually feel in the 1960s? Many genuinely loved the Soviet Union. They had some its sons, named the children after its heroes, wore the dress designed by it. They believed, they were told to believe, and they did believe in the brotherhood. And now they were told it was all a lie. The Soviets were revisionists. They always were. And Chinese people, who were very good at surviving political reversals, didn't understand the whole picture, but could still perform the denunciation. Before the breakup, Chinese called Russians Comrades. After that, Chinese call them Maozi again. Old furry guy. Nothing to do with the king. Publicly, loudly, with full ideological commitment. They could love you today, hate you tomorrow. That is not hypocrisy. That is self-preservation. But there actually were a group of people who get confused by the propaganda. Is Soviet Union a good place or not? Do you know South Korea is doing loudspeaker broadcasts to North Korea all the time, promoting the benefits of capitalism and South Korea? Sometimes they even play K-pop songs for all day long. Can you imagine hearing iPads for 24 hours as a North Korean citizen? Anyway, this was what Soviet Union doing to China at border back then. Cross-border broadcasts and propaganda poetry. All of these stuffs really attracted 67,000 Chinese to cross the border illegally. Till then, Soviet Union is just like the the United States of that time. After they entered the Soviet Union, they went returned to China, but they didn't find the imagined socialism life either. What they got is just Khrushchev's coins. After all of this, you should know there was something between China and Soviets. Then, the wars ran out. March 2nd, 1969, Zhenbao Island, a tiny piece of island in the frozen Missouri River. Chinese and Soviet soldiers had been in a tense standoff there for months. Chinese troops, who had prepared and trained specifically for this, initiated the engagement. Soviet forces responded with overwhelming firepower, tanks, artillery. The battle lasted weeks. Both sides took real casualties. Soviets even discussed internally whether to apply nuclear powers of multi-megaton nuclear bombs to, once and for all, get rid of the Chinese threat. This event almost never appears in Western countries of the Cold War. The most dangerous relationships are not between enemies. They are between people who used to call each other family and still remember what that felt like. So, by 1969, the brothers had shot at each other. The relationship was over. Or, at least, that is what they both said. China called the period before the Sino-Soviet honeymoon. By the way, after the breakup, China started to resume the relationship with the United States. And the period is called normalization by the United States, but US-China honeymoon by China. History is really a long gay fiction, right? But cursed couples do not end cleanly. They just go quiet for a while. And then, the other side collapses, and suddenly, you feel things you are not supposed to feel.
Okay, all right. Listen to me. I'm no asphaltian commie. You got that?
December 25th, 1991. The Soviet flag is lowered over the Grieve for last time. Mikhail Gorbachev resigns. The Soviet Union is officially over. It is Christmas Day in the West. Nobody planned that. In Beijing, there were no celebrations, no public mourning either. That would be politically complicated. There was just silence. Even they had to speak to the world, they just published one documentary report per day. No emotion revealed. And what did ordinary Chinese people feel? Not the party, the people. Some felt really excited. You have to know, 1991, China has transformed and opened up to capitalism. Some businessmen and daoye, profiteers between China and the Soviets, were really excited about Soviet Union splitting into 15 countries because the clients they could trade with had been expanded from just one union to 15 countries. But many just felt genuine sadness, and this is important to understand, not because they loved the Soviet Union, but because the Soviet Union represented something. It was proof that an alternative to the Western world order was possible, that you could be modern without being American, that you could be powerful without being capitalist. When the USSR fell, it felt like the proof had been revoked, like someone had come and erased the only blackboard. That showed a different equation. Some Chinese still called themselves 苏联遗老, Soviet orphan. Liu Zhixia, the author of 铁道游击队, railway guerrillas, suffered a fatal cerebral hemorrhage caused by extreme emotion distress while giving reports on the dissolution of Soviet. A Peking University professor chose to end his life in despair as a final protest, leaving behind a note that read, "Communism will ultimately prevail." And this mood is not just about the generation who experienced it. I have a friend who was born 10 years after the dissolution of Soviet Union. She likes every capitalism luxury, but every time he hears the national anthem of Soviet Union, he just couldn't help crying. That's the tears about the unfinished communism dream. This show, 那年那兔那些事儿 Year, How, Affairs, was watched by millions of young Chinese people who were born after the Cold War ended. They did not live through the Soviet era, but they learned to mourn it anyway, because the bear in the show was not just the Soviet Union. It was the idea that China was never alone in the world, that someone once had its back. Nostalgia is not memory. It's a story you tell about memory, once you've decided what it means. But then, we got someone, and knew that Chinese is not the only Soviet orphan. Vladimir Putin becomes acting president on December 31st, 1999. He is 47 years old then. Former KGB official, very known internationally, and he immediately starts doing something that captures Chinese internet's complete attention. He starts making Russia great again. He pushed back against American unipolarity, publicly, repeatedly, without apology. He reasserted Russian control over his own resources. He made Western leaders uncomfortable and did not seem to care. And Chinese internet, which had watched 10 years of Russia as capitalism follower, responded. Not just, wow, Russia is recovering, but this is when Russia looks like a socialist bro again. Here is what I want you to understand about this moment. Chinese people are not falling in love with Russia. They were falling in love with a possibility. The possibility that a country the worst had humiliated could stand up, look the camera in the eye, and say no. China had its own version of that history. The century of humiliation, the unequal treaties, the foreign laws. Putin was not a foreign leader to Chinese nationalists. He was a mirror, his fantasy of what counts after humiliation. Putin was a projection screen, and what got projected onto him was China's own aspiration. You don't love someone else's hero. You love what they prove is possible for you. And the emotion for Putin is way more than personal idealization. Just keep that in mind. When Chinese are thinking about President Russia, this is no way they could escape from the nature of Putin. Putin, Russia. They are constructed as a mixture to Chinese. So, the first impression about Russia is that it is a stable ally. Unlike those democratic countries, Putin has stuck to his position for nearly 24 years. He has photos with nearly every president of China. Why does this guy never quit his job? For real, that's too long, even for a dictatorial country. And the second impression is its socialist nature and its history as Soviet Union brought by Putin, who was a KGB agent. China's economy is roughly 9 times the size of Russia's today, and yet, Chinese people still look at Russia and see something they can't dismiss. The ghost of a big brother who once made them feel small. That makes China still treat Russia as a great country, and deep down, Chinese people crave Russian approval. That's why Russian, whether real or fake, could go viral in China. Fulafu, a Russian influencer in China, whose video was basically constantly repeating 我爱中国, I love China, and how great China is. Just one video of him could get 3 million likes.
兄弟姐妹们，你们好，我是俄罗斯娜拉。
俄罗斯娜拉, a Chinese woman used filter to disguise herself as a Russian, and got more than 2 million followers. And Putin himself also got lots of fans and memes. Chinese internet calls him 普京大帝, Putin the emperor, but his fans call him 瓦洛加, Volodya, the nickname of Vladimir. In the meme world, Putin is a cute baby. You know what is interesting? It's illegal in Russia to make memes out of Putin. But China is a mystery country. Not only have they make memes, but they also go further and map or feminize Putin. Russia is defeated. Volodya, whose physical age has downgraded to 30, is arrested. NATO announces that he is dead in the occupation and is actually confined to prison. Directly replacing the face and body of Mr. Volodya, who is about to become president in his 30s. The core is Vladimir Putin, who has been in power for 20 years. Rape, training, wheelchair, wreck, mob, water management, forced younger generation. The 战斗民族 battle nation meme is the same logic. Chinese internet branded Russia as ultimate hardcore guys, doing extreme sports or fights in minus 40 degrees, wrestling beers, drinking vodka in pizzas. Not mocking, affectionate, even envious. Because the meme is a way of loving something at a safe distance, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to survive the next betrayal. When you can't fully trust someone, you turn them into a meme. It's the only way to love them safely. So, this is where the relationship was before 2022. Complicated, layered, full of things neither side would say directly. The kind of relationship where you don't define it. Because if you try to define it, one of you have to admit something uncomfortable. And then, Russia invaded Ukraine. February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. And on Chinese social media, within hours, a narrative forms. Not confusion, not debate, a narrative. Already assembled, already ready to go. The story goes like this. Russia is not invading. Russia is defending. NATO spent 30 years pushing east, broken promises, advancing missiles, surrounding Russia inch by inch. Ukraine is not a victim. Ukraine is a weapon pointed at Russia, built by Washington. And Russia finally said, enough. This was not fringe thinking. This was a dominant frame on Chinese social media in February 2022. Russia said, we are surrounded. We had no choice. A significant portion of Chinese internet said, we understand exactly what you mean. But here is where the story gets much stranger. and much more human. Some Chinese people didn't just support Russian online, they went for it, literally. There are around from 150 to 200 Chinese citizens joined the Russian army as contract soldiers to fight Ukraine. Some of them were attracted by the revenue. Russia promised to offer monthly salaries ranging from $2,000 to $2,500, which is much higher than those people could earn back in China. Some of them are driven by a strong belief that Russia is fighting against natural expansion or Western hegemony. They view the participation as a way to support a strategic ally of China, saying, China and Russia, if one falls, the other falls. Many recruits underestimated the lethality of modern drone warfare. Interviews with captured or returning soldiers suggested that they expected rear guards or technical roles, but were instead deployed as column fodder in high-casualty frontline assaults. And some of them joined the army just because they could fight Japanese soldiers from Ukraine army. That's from the one who was confirmed the first died Chinese soldier during the war. These soldiers thought they were coming to fight with the Russian brothers, but the facts they faced were just discrimination. There was an interview with a Chinese soldier fighting for Russia. He said, from the very first day in training camp, there was serious racial discrimination against black soldiers, against Arab soldiers, against Chinese soldiers. His protective equipment, two rusty iron plates, his helmet had a bullet hole in it, already used, already hit. The girl he bought himself to actually survive was confiscated. He described soldiers locked in a basement for refusing to kill. He described trying to escape, being sent back. This is what happens when the meme meets the war, when the battle nation fantasy meets banker, when the love for Putin the emperor meets two rusty iron plates and a broad helmet. And all these are shadow banned in China right now. The question that cannot be talked about, the silence between cursed couple.
Remember, all I'm offering is the truth.
So, 600 years, a diamond kingdom, a big brother, a breakup, a war on a frozen river that nobody talks about, a collapsing giant, a meme god, a group of volunteered soldiers, a forced silence. Every cursed couple has the same problem. They can't fully trust each other. They can't fully leave each other, and they both know, they really know, what the other one is capable of. You know what the most cursed part is? Neither of them would use the word cursed. They both say it's complicated, which is exactly what every cursed couple says. At least, that's what China is doing.